Rajan, you got some interesting ideas right now about what it means to be vertically integrated and how much you can really count on your third parties.
Yeah, I mean, when we're talking about a supply chain disruption, Apple and a company run by Tim Cook, clearly you don't want to bet against. But that number that cut around 10 million, first, let's look at it in context. Last year, Apple produced 75 million units of the iPhone 12. Even with this 10 million cut that's being reported, they would still produce 80 million units of the new iPhone 13. So we're still seeing a year-on-year increase for what's essentially an incremental upgrade of a phone. But even more important, what that we have to look at is we all know that Monday there's the big event where they're going to be releasing a new line of MacBooks. And I'm very hopeful that they stick with the USB-C charger and don't go back to the MagSafe because I bought like 10 different dongles. But last year's event, we have to look at, they introduced the M1 chip. They moved away from production from Intel that they'd stuck with since 2006 and introduced their own chip into the new MacBooks and eventually the iPad Pro. And this is Tim Cook's strategy of being aggressive on vertical integration, of slowly taking more and more control over the supply chain. Yes, these are outsourced to Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, but it's a highly exclusive deal. They have leverage over their suppliers. And this is where I think investors really need to look at which companies have shown this ability to vertically integrate their supply chains. Because in an era of supply chain disruption, it's those companies that are going to be able to weather these storms better than others. It's the ones that own, whether it's their manufacturing, their operations, their logistics, their relationships with their customers. They're going to definitely fare better than the companies that have outsourced everything.
I was going to say, what kinds of names would you actually worry about? Companies that who have outsourced to a degree where they said, look, this is super efficient. We don't have to worry about this stuff, but now it might be coming back to bite them.
Yeah, I think it's not even necessarily a category or sector issue. It is, let's look at two different companies within the same sector. If you take car makers, Toyota has traditionally been known as being light years ahead in terms of owned logistics and operations. Even they have weathered the chip shortage better than others because exclusive relationships with suppliers, stockpiling of components. So even though every car manufacturer does appear to be taking a hit, Toyota is certainly better positioned than others. But you see the reaction, though, because Hyundai's chief operating officer just came out and said now they want to start thinking about making their own chips. So everyone does recognize the importance of starting to own more of your value chain. And I do think any investor within a specific category, always, if you have two companies, who owns more, who controls more, who is more predictable in terms of what they're producing.
But it's tough, Ranjan, to understand that because it's not always based on size, and it's not something that often gets talked about on earnings calls. Like, for example, Tesla, in terms of units, is really small, but they've weathered this really well. And my guess is just because the way that they build cars and the components that they use, they're a bigger share to smaller suppliers and therefore end up having more leverage. I don't know if you have any insight into that.
Yeah, I actually think this is a really unique moment because at first glance, my worry almost is, okay, now Apple, Nike, all these companies that are the giants are going to use this again. The pandemic has already helped the biggest companies grow exponentially, that this would be yet another area that these companies are able to just further entrench themselves and dominate. But I think the Tesla example you gave is a perfect reminder, though Tesla market cap wise is one of the biggest companies in the world. But when you take a smaller manufacturer, it allows the ones that have been built in a more cohesive, really tight way in their supply chain. I actually think the companies, the mid-sized companies, the fast-growing companies that own more of their logistics, they're the ones that this is the moment that they're going to really start to see themselves accelerate and grow.